I have to remind you the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, and supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views, and, well, for the next hour, they're going to be the views of our good friend Bob Fletcher, but always a fascinating guest, and we always look forward to having Bob Fletcher with us here at Radio Liberty. Hi, Bob. How are we doing tonight?
Hi. Well, hanging in like the rest of the world, I guess. You know, the NASA programs. If you ask somebody right now, an average American, you say, what's going on with the space and with NASA? Basically, you say, well, that's kind of shut down, isn't it? You know, that's the impression we get. The impression we get that, in fact, the NASA programs they're really not doing much of anything. And if you keep track of it, which I do, it's every day or two there are huge things going on. There are big events taking place. There are shots going up still every every month or so. We have the space station. We have, again, like I said, multinational cooperation. They're sending their people up on a regular basis. They're continuing to build these things. They're continuing to carry out all sorts of very, very important space projects. And as far as the Americans and, well, actually, as the world is concerned, it's kind of like, oh, it's sort of been shut down to almost nothing, so why even bother looking at it? But there's an awful lot going out there, and they are not telling us unbelievable discoveries they're making out in outer space.
What do you find? What do we hear that they really are accomplishing? Have you got any idea?
Yeah, and again, let me use an extraordinary, interesting situation. I briefly mentioned it a while back. 20 years ago, NASA, and they were the ones who made the discovery, they never said a single word about this, all right, for 20 years, actually almost 30 at this point in time. Then they finally just came out with it, and what they had located, and by the way, the difference now, because we had sent a photographing telescope way out in space and passed close enough to where they could now get some real good pictures close up of Saturn. Now remember, we think of Saturn as the big old planet out there, and it has all the big disk floating around it, which is all just sort of space debris and junk floating in a big circle around the outside of it. But what they had found at the North Pole is this gigantic rotating hexagon. Now, it's rotating on a regular basis. I believe it's 10 hours. Does one revolution every 10 hours and 35 minutes, something like that. All right? They can't make out what it is, really. It appears, it looks like a structure. But they're not wanting to admit that it might be something like that. First off, it's really big. It's big enough to fit 3 Earths into the middle of this hexagon. Okay, so that's how large it is. It would be the equivalent of across the diameter of 3 Earths across in the middle of this thing. And it's circulating, rotating on a regular basis, 10.5 hours every day, day in and day out. So this rotates around. Now, what's really extra interesting also, there is a radio impulse signal that comes out, and they're implying that it comes from the center of Saturn, and it comes out giving out a specific radio impulse, and it's on exactly the same time sequence of one revolution of this huge hexagon on the North Pole of Saturn. Now,
but what's the significance of it?
Well, first off, what is it? In other words, if this is a physical structure, it is mind-boggling in terms of its size. Number two, if it is a physical structure, who did it? And now they've been watching this for, like I said, 20 to 30 years. All right. And again, originally it was just like a vague kind of a thing. They thought it was maybe storms going on a regular basis there. But then as they got in closer and closer,
in other words, basically they have all these things and they're all classified because they don't want the American people to know, and why not let the American people know? Supposedly we have a free society. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a free society. The government has all sorts of secrets. You go to work for the government, you sign a secrecy agreement, and basically if you ever reveal what you've ever learned there, why, they can send you to prison for the rest of your life. Go right ahead, Bob.
I've discovered so many secret equipment, aircraft, spacecraft of different types that we have now finished. We've had finished, and programs of that sort. The use of electronics, and that is so far what you and I used to see in our regular science laboratories at school. They're just so far advanced. And they're not sharing this stuff with the, and I almost don't. I understand that you if you want to control people, which the intent is of the bad guys in government, if you want to control them, again, you don't want them to have too much. They certainly don't want us to have the right to have arms. That's a big problem. See, that bothers them, because when they do martial law and clamp down on us, for whatever reason it may end up being, that's why they've been buying all the bullets themselves, and they've been buying all the weapons, and they've been digging the underground facilities and putting the foods under there and doing all of those sneaky, underhanded operations, and at the same time not telling us step by step when things are discovered. Where would we be if they had kept the secret of, Edison's, and the original creation of electricity and the light bulbs and all of those things and all of those inventions, Alexander Graham Bell's telephone? Where would we be if they had kept all that from the general public and just hooked it up for the government to use? We'd still be wandering around like we were in the 1890s. Trying to figure out how to feed the horses. Well,
if we have an EMP attack, electromagnetic pulse attack, maybe we will be back there. In fact,
right. That may clean our slate, and then we'll all be right back again. And that's not going to be it'd be very indiscriminate. So the bad guys are going to be in trouble with that too. And therein lies...
And that really why it doesn't make sense, because basically I would think they would be doing everything they possibly can to basically, prevent this thing from happening, and the bad guys are not doing everything they can. That's what doesn't make sense, which makes me feel that there is another force out there that we don't know about.
Yes.
Go right ahead.
Right, and that's my feeling. I think what has all of a sudden been the realization of, again, when I use that simple term, the bad guys, all of a sudden I think there was the complete realization that there is some cataclysmic event going to take place. It's headed toward us. There may not be a good way to put a date on it today, but that it apparently, because of the expenditures in the last 10 years and the activities in the last 5 years, it appears that they are worried that it's going to take place rather soon. Now, whether this an electromagnetic force, the flares, if it's a natural thing for like corona events coming out of the sun, or if it's in fact an enemy that has the ability to just throw in a couple of bombs, dirty bombs in a couple of areas and blow out all of our electrical system. That I don't think that's not what it is. See, it's way, way above that. And so what their thought is, well, we're going to save X numbers of people, maybe 1 million people that we are designated we're going to try to save. So they're going to go underground. They've got all of the foodstuffs underground. They've got their generators. They got their fuel to run them for some unknown period of time, depending on how many are in their different holes. And this is serious. This is all done. I mean, and when I say done, I mean it's done sufficiently so that next week, if it happens, a bunch of people will be underground and will be living, and the rest of us on the top of the ground are not going to be.
Well, basically, Bob has been talking about Saturn and this strange hexagon there. Of course, somebody just called and pointed out that the real name for Saturn was Satan, basically, that they were one and the same, and we call it Saturn, but of course it is satanic. We don't know.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's all conjecture. But I will tell you one thing, ladies and gentlemen, we live in fascinating times. For those of you who know the Lord, and we may disagree with some of our guests, but we do believe there's a spiritual battle taking place, because it's a lot easier to understand that way. They look at so much of what's going on today, it just doesn't make sense. And the fact that most people don't know about the underground facilities that are there, well, we'll be talking more about that later. We're out of time. We'll be back in just a moment here at Radio Liberty. Well, Bob, you've got 3 minutes to wrap up the program. You go right ahead.
Okay, thanks. Not only did we lose from the Department of Defense $2.3 trillion, we lost $19 trillion from the feds. The feds gave away $19 trillion a couple of years ago out of the feds' money and approved loans that they do not even know where it went. And I thought $2.3 trillion was a lot, but I saw the interviews with a lady who was in charge of the investigations, doing an audit on the feds, and they said, in fact, or she said, that they had lost $19 trillion. They didn't know where the money was lent to.
Well, we're out of time, Bob. I appreciate all the work that you're doing. We'll look forward to talking to you real soon.